Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to News Dose. And we have been talking about this for well over a year. It has been a long journey, that's for sure. But with some breaking news today, all signs now indicate that the Activision Blizzard acquisition will complete sooner rather than later. One of Microsoft's biggest hurdles was just cleared as the CMA appears to be siding with them now. And we're going to talk about that today and how all this came to be. This is a massive win for Microsoft and for Xbox. We also need to talk about Sony's situation as well, though, because they're now under fire thanks to their very own complaints about this acquisition. Probably not what they were intending, but they're now drawing attention from somebody in the United States government as she's putting pressure on Japan to fix the problem. So, yeah. It's been a wild 24 hours. As always, though, we're going to kind of take this journey together. But yes, do hit those buttons below if you're enjoying the content. It helps the channel a ton. But we do have a lot to get into today, though. So, I mean, let's just go ahead and jump right into it. And I'm actually going to start today by rectifying a mistake that I made in yesterday's video. We did talk about the Redfall previews yesterday, and I said that the previews were glowing, which the ones that I read, that very much was the case. But somebody did point out that there were some mixed previews out there as well. So just a little bit of a heads up on that. I don't want to oversell something or anything like that. And anytime I make a mistake, I want to come and steer you all back in the right direction. And that's why you all should definitely leave comments below. I do read every single comment. That is actually completely honest. I really do that. But with that said, my takeaway from those previews is still ultimately the same. It does sound like Redfall is shaping up to be both a good single player and a good cooperative experience. It just kind of depends on how you want to play. Nonetheless, though, I do recommend checking out those previews yourself if you're curious, and then just kind of go with who you trust. With that out of the way, though, let's just go and get right into the new stuff here, starting off with a surprising new game that was announced to be inside a new game. I guess a gameception, if you will. But what's happening here is that Leslie Benzies, the former producer of the Grand Theft Auto franchise, yeah, that's an important name there, well, his new studio, Build a Rock Boy, just announced Mind's Eye, which actually looks pretty interesting. You can see the teaser here, but I'll get back to that in just a second. But in order to talk about this game, we also need to talk about another game in this case because they're actually linked. So what they're doing here is that they're releasing a new ambitious game later this year by the name of Everywhere. They announced this last year, and it's kind of hard to gauge exactly what this game is, but now, thanks to some new information, it appears to be built out as a platform, if you will. Now, what I mean by that is, think of a game like Roblox as an example where you can create games within the game, and that's kind of where Mind's Eye comes in. This is a creation releasing alongside Everywhere, and as you can see from its early teaser, it's quite impressive. They are describing Mind's Eye as a AAA experience with cinematics. It's got a conspiracy storyline. There's driving and shooting, and actually it's kind of about how you would describe GTA to an extent, but there's also some futuristic stuff here as well. Whatever the case may be, though, it looks like a regular AAA game, but in this case, interestingly enough, it's actually linked to Everywhere. That's quite impressive, and it does show you the capabilities and just how ambitious Everywhere actually is. Again, though, this is a game targeting a 2023 release, so we'll definitely keep an eye on both titles as we hear more. Now, we also got an update for Silent Hill 2. Kind of ironic this news comes the same day Resident Evil 4 Remake dropped. Fans of horror games are just living the dream right now. And even more so, now that Bloober Team revealed that Silent Hill 2 Remake's development is near completion. Now, it sounds like they still have some polishing to do, so it's not necessarily 100% complete or anything like that. But with that in mind, I do imagine that we'll start to see some more significant updates on this game sometime here soon. Maybe a new trailer, maybe a specific release date, and I thought about when they can make an announcement like that. And the two places that kind of comes to mind here are E3 and then PlayStation's rumored showcase before E3. So maybe we'll get a big update on Silent Hill 2 at one of those two showcases, and for that matter, maybe some of Konami's other highly rumored games like Castlevania and Metal Gear Solid. Oh, and we also got another new game announcement. It's actually been a really good week for these game announcements, whether that be Mind's Eye, Lego 2K Drive, which some of you said is already your game of the year. It does admittedly look really good. But now a new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game was also announced as well, though this one This one really caught my eye. This is for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Last Ronin, which apparently is based on a graphic novel miniseries that many describes as one of the best stories the Turtles universe has to offer. It's supposedly a darker and much more mature take on the series, and actually, let's just go and take a look at its description here. It reads, a New York Times bestseller, Who is the Last Ronin? In a future battle-ravaged New York City, a lone surviving turtle embarks on a seemingly hopeless mission seeking justice for the family he lost. So, yeah, you can immediately tell that this is a darker and more mature story with all but one turtle dying off, and they did note that the game adaptation is targeting an older audience. So while I have not read the graphic novels or anything, I actually think that this sounds really interesting. I grew up as a huge Turtles fan. It was actually one of my favorite cartoons as a kid. So I actually really like the sounds of this being targeted to adults that, that grew up on this type of stuff. Now, they also noted that it's inspired by action RPGs like God of War, which is yet another really good sign. So last year we got Shredder's Revenge, which was a great throwback to beat-em-up style of games. But if you've been hoping for a larger-scale AAA Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, well, here it is. Though, at the same time, do understand that it sounds like it's still years away from actually releasing. Let's go and talk about this Activision Blizzard stuff, though, because I know this is what everybody's been kind of waiting for. But the first of the final findings are everything that Microsoft has been building up to here. This is an acquisition that has been in the making for over a year now. That is crazy to think about, but it's constantly faced roadblocks by these different regulators, especially with the FTC and the CMA. And while there's several reasons as to why, this is a nearly $70 billion acquisition. We always knew it was going to face scrutiny, but the one major consistent hurdle has always been Sony's ongoing complaints. Sony's very own Jim Ryan was flying around to these different regulators, pleading their case that the acquisition is unfair, it's anti-competitive, and that they can't compete without Call of Duty. The problem with their complaints, though, has always been very evident for most gamers, and this is in threefold. One is the data. And what does the data tell us? It tells us that Sony has historically been dominant within the console space. You cannot argue with those facts. Number two, while Sony might complain about exclusivity and content parity, the truth is, Sony is guilty of these exact same practices, including, ironically, with Call of Duty. They lock down exclusive Call of Duty content and have been doing so for a while. Number three, and this might be the most important thing here, it's been fairly obvious since day one of this acquisition that Microsoft wants to keep Call of Duty multi-platform, similar to what they do with Minecraft. Now, I can understand why regulators question this and whether they'll stay true to their word going forward. But once Microsoft started dealing contracts to different companies like Nintendo, like Nvidia, and they did also attempt to come to an agreement with Sony as well, that was pretty much the beginning of the end of any dispute that these regulators have. And it also exposed that Sony was arguing in bad faith as they still refused to sign any type of contract. In their own words, quoted by Activision's Lulu Chang, their goal was not to sign a contract, but instead, Sony said that they just want to block the deal. Well, the CMA, in which I've been calling the wild card for this entire acquisition, is now the latest to see through Sony's complaints. Yes, just as the EU threw Sony's complaints out last week, the CMA quickly followed with a statement today that reads, having considered the additional evidence provided, we have now provisionally concluded that the merger will not result in a substantial lessening of competition in console gaming services because the cost to Microsoft of withholding Call of Duty from PlayStation would outweigh any gains from taking such action. So there it is. And Sony might be reconsidering not signing that contract before. Call of Duty is going to remain multi-platform regardless, but I don't know if they're going to necessarily get the same benefits without that contract. I don't know. But this very much appears to be the beginning of the end of this case. Both the EU and the CMA have narrowed down their investigation to only include cloud gaming, which has a clear path to victory for Microsoft. They've already gone a long way in addressing this concern by signing a contract with Nvidia, Boosteroid, and Ubisoft to bring games to their cloud services as well. Microsoft also claims that more of these contracts are to come, so by all indications, Microsoft is now in the home stretch. This acquisition just went from maybe possibly completing to almost surely completing just like that. See, this is exactly why I said after the CMA posted their provisional findings a month or so back that this was not over yet. A lot of people seemingly just immediately jumped to the conclusion that the deal was dead after those findings, but I didn't read it that way because the wording that they used indicated they were willing to listen to Microsoft to see if they could figure something out together, and that's exactly where we are now. Now, keep in mind, though, nothing is necessarily 100% complete yet, so there's still a lot of things that could happen here, but as of right now, as we currently stand, this is a huge, massive win for Microsoft, and now we really just need to kind of wait for the EU and the CMA to come to their final conclusions. The CMA is supposed to make a final decision by April 26th, could be sooner, and then for the EU, that's set for May 22nd. Again, it could be sooner. Now, as for Sony, though, this is obviously a big loss for them as it strengthens Xbox's business. And it's been clear for a while now that Sony does not want more competition. They want things to stay exactly as they are now because they are dominating right now. This was never about the quote-unquote concern of losing Call of Duty. They knew that wasn't going to happen. Their concern ultimately comes from Xbox putting themselves in a better position. Xbox Game Pass, that's going to be stronger, and that's something that Sony does not want because they like their $70 games. And then Sony, they now also lose that extra exclusive content for Call of Duty. That and their marketing will now be a thing of the past so long as this acquisition completes, which by all means, that very much does appear to be the case. Here's the thing, though. Sony's complaining, constant complaining, and with how they and regulators twisted the market's competition, they've ironically put themselves in a bit of hot water. See, regulators, and this is ridiculous, but throughout this buyout had Sony in their ear, and both the CMA and the FTC started to adopt the idea that Nintendo is somehow not competition for Xbox and PlayStation, which is just an absolutely ridiculous statement. But that's what happened. Basically, the reason Sony needed regulators to believe this is because one of Microsoft's original leading arguments was that Nintendo was proof that you don't need Call of Duty to have success in console gaming. Well, because of that, to counteract that argument, a new term was kind of born throughout this entire fiasco, and that was competition for high-end console gaming. Well, unfortunately for the FTC and Sony here, that argument has now backfired as it's caught the attention of a United States Senator, Maria Cantwell. So what's happening here is that the United States and Japan are currently in talks to expand cooperation in various areas, and one thing that they discuss here is trade. Well, during these talks, Maria Cantwell brought forth the quote-unquote high-end console market because according to that term, that means that PlayStation has a 98% share in Japan, while Xbox has 2%. The even bigger problem that she brought up, though, was that Sony not only has a monopoly under this term, but on top of that, she believes Japan is allowing Sony to engage in blatant anti-competitive practices by signing exclusive contracts to keep Japanese games off Xbox. Games like Final Fantasy, Silent Hill, Street Fighter, etc., etc. So she's asking Japan, what are they going to do about this to stop this from happening going forward and to allow for a more even playing field? Well, Japan did respond by saying, that is absolutely an area that we are primed to address. This one is new for me, but let me take this back. I'm happy to follow up with you and your team on this. So, as ironic as it might be, Sony seemingly has hurt themselves by bringing so much publicity to their very own business practices. I mean, this is kind of crazy when you think about it, but that's where we are. Sony seemingly failed in stopping the acquisition. By all indications, again, it looks like it will go through. And somehow, at the same time, they've managed to find themselves under scrutiny for what they're doing in Japan. And then meanwhile, they've been subpoenaed in the FTC case. I mean, truthfully, nobody should ally with the FTC. They are an absolute embarrassment of an organization that doesn't even follow the law. That's been very clear for a while. So Sony, they chose the wrong side to work with here. Now, at the end of the day, though, not including Nintendo as competition is still absolutely ridiculous. I thought it was ridiculous in Microsoft's case. I think it's ridiculous here. They obviously are competition, but that's why this argument should have never, ever been made in the first place. They just did not think this through at all, and it seemingly has come back to bite them. Let's go take a look at the poll of the day, though, and with the breaking news today, I wanted to go and ask you all, outside of Call of Duty, do you think Microsoft will make other Activision Blizzard franchises exclusive to the Xbox system? And yes, the majority of you all here, being 86%, do believe yes on a case-by-case basis, while 10% believes no, they will keep everything multi-platform. See, honestly, I feel like it's just such a shame that we've had to focus so much of our attention on Call of Duty over the last 12 plus months, because it's always been very obvious that's going to be multi-platform. The bigger question has always been in regards to all these other Activision Blizzard franchises. Technically, Microsoft might make some of those exclusive on a case-by-case basis. Crash Bandicoot 5 might actually be exclusive. If Diablo 5 comes out in like 10 years from now, that could end up being exclusive. You have the next Spyro and all these different Activision Blizzard titles. Any game that isn't already announced could potentially be an Xbox exclusive in the future to promote their own ecosystem, things like Game Pass. That is something that we have seen with Bethesda, and that is something that could be applied here in Activision Blizzard's case as well, because there's no concessions made to say otherwise. They are free to do what they want with these franchises. Now, as for Call of Duty, again, that game, considering the size of it, the multiplayer aspect and everything, it makes sense for it to stay multi-platform, similar to what they do with Minecraft. The same thing could probably be said with games like Overwatch, maybe World of Warcraft as well. But all in all, yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what they do with all these different franchises going forward. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode. But if you liked the video, don't forget to bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.